Hi everyone, it's Thomas here. I want to do a recap of kind of the demonstration part of tonight's workshop. So we kind of covered hooking up with databases, we kind of covered relational databases, non-relational databases, but that's all in the slides, so I'm going to leave that to y'all to review. What I want to cover is kind of the MongoDB side of things. So if you look in the slides, we also have an how to install page. And if you follow this link, it should take you to something about right here. It might actually be a slightly little different page, but it'll just go through and have options to install on your machine of choice. In this case, I'm going to do Mac OS. It's all pretty straightforward. It goes through the entire steps. So just do whatever you want to do and follow these instructions carefully. There are several options. So if you're on Mac, you can do it manually. You can also use Homebrew. Whatever it is, do what you would like and follow the steps. If we go back to the slides, I also have a link to another page, and in this case there's something called Robo3T, and if you go there, it'll go through a download, and this is just going to be a GUI that we can look at our data and interact with it. Do whatever you see fit. There's another one that Gabriel told me about after our workshop called MongoDB Compass. If you want to use that and give that a shot, it's also a GUI for MongoDB. I have not used it, so I don't know what it's like. I've used RoboMongo in the past or Robo3T in the past. So that's what I use, but do whatever you feel, whatever you prefer. So I'm going to kind of go over, get started now kind of on the process and how to actually start up your Mongo server. So I'm going to clear this up really quickly. All right, so now that you have Mongo installed, if you have it added to path, you can go ahead and start it. You can as simply as MongoD. Because I have it set that to go to a certain location, so I seeded it in there already. Go to wherever it's located if you don't have it added to path. MongoD is the basic starting command to starting up your Mongo database. Okay. By default, it looks into a /data/db folder. If it's not created, you have to create it. However, you can specify any location on your computer that you want to store your data. And in this case, I wanted to store it at my /users Thomas McDonald databases Mongo data right there. Okay. However you want to store it, wherever you want to store it, you go ahead and do that and just create that folder and then make sure you get the path and point it to that. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and put this into my terminal. Remember, if it's not added to path, make sure you cd to the correct location that it's located. If you follow the instructions on how to install Mongo, you should know where it's located / it should be added to path, so you don't have to worry about it. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and where it's located, and I'm just going to do this MongoD, and then I'm going to specify where my data is located. On Mac or on Linux, you might have it just where it's just this flag, this dbpath equals. However, if you're on Windows, it might look a little different, but the concept is the same. You still have an argument, and you might have an equals here, and then you also pass in your string. It could be wrapped in quotes too, but do whatever the instructions say. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and start this database, and if it's all well and good, we can see that starting here at port 27017 with our DB path wherever it's located. We have our DB version, a bunch of metadata regarding the database. And at the end here, we see waiting for connections on this port. Great, so everything looks like it's working properly. Let's go ahead and see if we can connect to it on our GUI. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Robo3T. And in this case, if you're running MongoDB Compass, go ahead and use that. I don't know what it looks like, but if you're on Robo3T, a window, something like this should pop up. You might not have anything here. So let's go through the steps. So if you have nothing here, you should go ahead and hit create, this little create icon. Go ahead and have a basic direct connection, nothing special. You can name it whatever you would like. I've named mine local Mongo database. Okay. Whatever you prefer, whatever you want to call it, right? Just choose a connection name that you want to call it. And then because it's running on my local machine, I have it set to localhost. And then I have it at port 27017, just like it told me in my terminal right down here. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and test that. Great, connected, access to database is available. Cool, go ahead and hit save whenever you have that working. So now I have my local Mongo database there, and I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. Now once I'm connected, you can see on the left here there's some stuff. Because I've used this in the past and I have some data regarding a STEM app, I'm going to have that here, and I'm going to use that for demonstrative purposes. But I'll also go through how you can create your own database on here. So if we go to STEM app, you can see that if we click down on this arrow, you can see that there's data associated with it. Collections here are essentially tables, if you think about it in SQL terms. But they're going to be tables, and that's where I have different tables to store different data. So here I have a users table, and this stores all my data regarding a user. So if I double click that, it should open up here. And this kind of view pops up, and I'll quickly explain this. So right here, what I've just highlighted, this section is kind of our query section. So you can write whatever queries you want. The default right now is just get collection users and then find, and then it passes in these little brackets with nothing specified. So it grabs everything within that database, and I'll show you how you can kind of narrow that down in a second. Down here, because I have data added to it right now, you can see that I have 4 objects that I've put into this database, or this collection actually. And this kind of looks nasty, has an object ID. This was actually created by MongoDB by default because I did not specify an ID, and these are all unique. Okay, per object has a unique ID. You can specify in your code, you can specify a specific ID and make sure that it's _ID. Okay. Moving on, I also have other pieces of data that I store here, usernames, passwords. This is probably not the most correct way to store username and passwords, largely because it's in a table with other information. So I might have another table that's solely for username and passwords, or a collection for another usernames and passwords. However, in this case, let's ignore that and let's move on. And you can see here too, the password's also encrypted, so nothing too much to worry about at the moment. That's beyond the scope of this talk. But we have user roles, we have camps, emails, so on and so forth, first names, last names, and each object has information regarding that user or that person. So we can go through here. We have, a John up top. This one is a Billy. We have another Billy down here. So let's see if I can, maybe I only want to look at, people that are named John. So here up top in this query, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple spaces. I can specify, first name in quotes, and then I'm also going to put a colon, and this tells me that the key first name, okay, and I'm going to put a colon, and then I'm going to put whatever I want to check it for. So find where the first name is equal to, and in this case, John, right there. And then to actually run this query, I'm going to hit this little green arrow up here, and we see, oh, we have the single object that has the first name, John. And that's the basic. So maybe let's try Billy now. So if we replace this with Billy, we should get our 2 Billies. So we have our 2 Billies users. Great. But maybe for our Billies, we might only want to find 1. There's also a find 1, and it'll find the first instance where the first name is equal to Billy inside of our database. So let's run that, and we should only get 1 object in return. We have Billy Smith. Great. So you can play around with this. You can find these commands online. It's also covered inside of W3 Schools, and I have the link for that in a sec. But you can mess around with that and create data and mess with it. But that's what Robo3T is, kind of a GUI, so you can visualize your data and your databases. So let's move on from there. I'm going to go ahead and close Mongo3T, or we'll leave it open for now. Okay. So now let's get into the actual, how can I use this in my code? Okay, so up here in our Aggie Coding Club workshops repository, if you go to we'll go to the root. If you go here, you can have, there's a Mongo folder. If you go to that, you have a README, right? So all this stuff that you're about to see is all from, it's just been modified from W3 Schools, and that link will take you here, and it has all the core functions that you'll need to know to basically use MongoDB with Node.js. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually start this. So make sure if you want to install MongoDB with npm if you haven't already. To do that, you can just open up your terminal, type in npm install MongoDB, and then it should install it, and you should be good to go at that point. So now let's actually start writing code. You can do var mongo here and require this and paste it here. So we'll go ahead and start that for now, but I'll show you in a second. I'm going to delete it here in a second because I don't necessarily need it. So now let's say I want to create, for our to-do list application, a to-do DB. So here we're going to create a database if it does not already exist. So this is really just going to connect to a database. If it exists, it'll allow us to connect to it. If it does not exist, it'll create it. In this case, we have a to-do DB that we want to create. So in our, all right, let me start off from the top. We have a Mongo client, and this will allow us to actually interact with our database. So we have to have this, you can see here, require MongoDB. Since we've done it up here, you could replace this with Mongo. For the sake of this, I'm going to copy and paste these little different sections, so I'm actually going to delete that from the top of the file up here. So let's copy this, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. Because I'm just using this right now, this line up here, this first line is useless. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So let's go here. I'll walk you through it. So now we have a Mongo client, and I want to connect to a specific database. So I give it the URL of where to connect it to. I say MongoDB, and right now it's running on localhost on port 27017, and I actually want to create a to-do DB database. And you can name it whatever you would like. It'll connect to it or create it. In this case, we didn't have it in our Robo3T, so it'll create it. And let's go ahead and run this. If it works, we should see database created. So right here, it'll try to connect to it. If there's an error, I'll throw an error. If it didn't throw an error, it means it created it or connected to it. And then we're going to close the database connection. So let's go ahead and try running this. So make sure you're in the correct directory. I'm in the Mongo folder. So if I type ls, we should be able to see our test.js. So we're going to go run node test.js and database created. Cool. All right, so we've created this database. If we check Robo3T right now, you can see, oh, there's not much there, right? Now we can refresh it. We still don't see anything. Well, that's, you might be wondering why. Well, that's because there's really nothing in that database. There's no collections, there's no functions, there's nothing. There's nothing inside. Okay, so what we want to do next is we actually want to create a collection, right? So we need to actually store some data. So we go here. So let's go create it. Most of this code is exactly the same. It's just to connect to our database. In this case, you can kind of see they don't have to-do-DB here. But right here they've done a take the database to-do-DB. This will actually work just fine if I just copy what's everything under here. It'll still work. So you can do it however you please. I'm just, for simplicity of this demo, I'm going to copy and paste right there. Okay. And then what we should do is, now that I've saved it, what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, in our to-do database, we're going to create a collection, okay? We're going to create a collection to-do lists, okay? So now, where we had users in our STEM app, we should see a to-do list connection, or collection, my apologies. And if we don't get an error doing that, we should see collection created. So let's go ahead and, I'm going to go ahead and clear this, so it's node test.js. And we can see, oh, collection created. Great. So let's go back to Robo3T and refresh. And we can now see, oh, there's to-do-DB right there. If we click down, we go to collections. We can double click that. And there are no records in this collection, but this collection exists. And that's where I'm going to stop for today. If you have questions or anything, feel free to ask me. You can play around with where we're at right now. If you continue following the README, you can, insert an item, and you can, kind of work on querying data within your database. Again, if you want more information, you can follow this link to W3 Schools, and it'll cover more operations that you might use inside of your code. So I wanted to thank you all very much, and y'all have a good night.